I'm going to invite Claire Woodley, who is the advanced nurse practitioner at Guy's, together with Rose Marshall and Nicola Peat, to talk about the fatigue service. I think every patient in this room will identify with fatigue being one of the most difficult symptoms to cope with. So thank you, Claire.
Lena's probably just already asked my first question. I'm going to ask two questions of you very firstly. Who has experienced fatigue? If you keep your hands up, for those of you who have had an intervention or had seen somebody to help you manage your fatigue. Which just shows us how kind of as clinicians, maybe we need to be having these conversations more about how we manage fatigue. So if I think about when I'm in a clinic and when I'm talking to patients, I get lots of different ways of patients explaining how fatigue is for them and what the definition of fatigue is for them. This definition you'll see here is actually what the National Comprehensive Cancer Network defined fatigue as: a persistent subjective sense of tiredness that's related to the cancer or cancer therapies that interferes with usual functioning. We've already heard at points today how fatigue is a common symptom for patients within this group of disorders. And some of the studies we have been performed show that it actually occurs between 81 and 95% of patients living with these chronic conditions will experience fatigue. And we know that fatigue can negatively impact on patients, their quality of life, physical, cognitive and social functioning. And for some patients, living with these conditions over a long time means that these can be a long-standing debilitating symptom, which we know varies from day to day, but equally also from hour to hour. And it's the randomness and the unpredictability of this symptom that can be frustrating and that can limit the activities that you're able to do. We know that fatigue for patients presents in different ways. And we often think about it as being a physical symptom, that overwhelming sense of exhaustion or muscle tiredness, feeling really physically fatigued after an activity that requires more effort from you. But equally, we also know that there's a cognitive element to it. So one day it might not be a physical symptom, but it might actually be that thinking fatigue, that mental fog, where actually you can't concentrate, you can't do the work that's in front of you, or it might be remembering information, or worse tasks, reading books, or kind of having a long conversation with somebody. Or it might be an emotional fatigue, our feelings impacting on fatigue. Is there a situation where it's more stressful for us and therefore we might want to avoid those situations? Or sometimes when we're feeling anxious or worried, then sometimes our fatigue at those points can be more. And if we combine these different domains of fatigue, then sometimes it will present as a volitional fatigue, be it that inability to begin a task or maybe avoid situations where you know that it might make you more tired and therefore you want to preserve your energy. For MPN patients, we know that actually fatigue is not about one cause and one answer. We know that there are the psychological elements that might contribute to fatigue. So the condition itself, do we have an anemia? That will equally make us fatigue. Treatments and medications, whilst for some patients might help with fatigue, equally for others it might make that fatigue a bit worse. Other symptoms that we might be experiencing can equally impact on fatigue levels. Unfortunately, if you have lots of night sweats, then you're not getting good sleep at night. Therefore, that might make your fatigue worse. We heard about nutrition earlier and how that can impact on our fatigue levels. Have we got any other conditions that might contribute to fatigue? Cardiac problems can quite often lead to increased levels of fatigue. Then there's the emotional side that might be impacting on it. Are we a bit low in mood? Are we difficult sleeping? What is our support network like? Do we have the support that might help us manage fatigue? And then the environmental and the psychosocial factors. So, treatment routines, are we looking after other people? Are we still working? How are we managing our work? And all of these things will contribute to fatigue for patients. So, I'll introduce, and I should have done this earlier, but Rose is our occupational therapist at Guy's Hospital, and Nicola is part of our physio teams. Did you just want to both quickly explain, for those that may not know, what your roles actually entail?
Am I going first? So I'm an occupational therapist. It's probably the one out of the two of us that you're less familiar with, unless you've seen an occupational therapist. I oversee the cancer OT team at Guy's Hospital. We run lots of different services that really look at how people manage symptoms related to their condition, or their treatment, to be able to keep doing the things that are most important to them. As an OT, I'm trained across physical and mental health. So for us, it's really thinking about that sort of mind-body connection and how we look through a really practical way of all of the strategies and advice that sort of we give and we have, but how that actually makes sense to the individual, the person in the room with us. So it's a really practical profession, but it is bringing in a lot of different concepts that straddle that kind of understanding of how the mind works and the impact that has on the body. Hand over to Nick.
So I'm Nick, and I'm a consultant physio, again based at Guy's, obviously counterpart to Rose. Do lead the physiotherapy service there, but I guess my background is I've had 16 years in cancer rehab, and that is really providing symptom support and sort of movement support, so where people have got impairments with movement, where their symptoms are really impacting on how they move and get through their day-to-day activities. I've really kind of worked on developing our services at Guy's so that we can help support our patients and manage that they're actually doing the things that matter to them day to day, so getting them back to hopefully optimal functional levels again.
Yeah. So for me, quite often when patients are presenting in clinic and we're talking about fatigue, often they've come in with their MPN scores and the fatigue score is right at the top. So, you know, it's the one that probably I speak most about with their patients. And I find when I'm trying to assess it, I'm looking at what fatigue means for that patient, how it's presenting for that patient, what they might already be doing to try and manage that fatigue, looking at patterns and things, and you know, and whether their strategies that they're using are working. If I find that my patient's got like that moderate, severe fatigue that perhaps, you know, interventions aren't working for them, then I'm quite often referring them straight over to your service. How would the assessment for you differ from what we might do in the clinic area?
I mean, first of all, I think most of the time, so we do work really closely together, and most of the time the assessment will be both of us in the room, so we'll probably share this question. I think how it differs is probably the detail that we're going to go into. So we'll start by understanding how the sort of person in front of us and their understanding of their fatigue, because actually without getting the difference between fatigue and tiredness and helping them advocate for themselves, helping them explain to their family, get their network on board, we can't really move forward, and that's really hard. And that tends to be the sort of penny drop moment when we help somebody believe that fatigue is actually a real symptom. It is different than tiredness. So that's such a crucial part of what we do, and I think can be downplayed probably. But beyond that, there's obviously a lot more that we do. We will look at somebody's daily life. We'll obviously get them to do a short bit of activity planning. We know lots of people don't enjoy that. I've had to do it going to courses. It isn't the most enjoyable activity, but it is really, really helpful at being able to unpick and work out patterns of fatigue, because the sort of unpredictability you spoke about, that's how it can feel. It can feel like you don't get what you've done the day before or that morning that has caused it, because it isn't cause and effect like tiredness. It often doesn't feel like it makes sense. But what we find through doing the activity planning is we can unpick it a little bit. We can work out how you get this balance, because that's really what we're trying to do, to get balance back and reduce that up and down, that boom and busting. Once we do that, we can build somebody up. And so that's the concept of what we do, but the how we do it is so individual for the person. Would you, I don't know what you'd add.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I'd agree. And that, And I know that sometimes in itself, when we say sometimes that activity diary, and I don't know if anyone has ever seen one or explored it, it can be as simple as that you're just looking at what your activities are like over a week or two. But the thing that's really important with it, you yourself start to go, okay, hold on, I can see that this activity made me feel like this, or this was actually something that actually it didn't really trouble my fatigue. And then you start to go, okay, but what's really important to you as well in that weekly plan that you're doing? So then you can start to then see, okay, well, how can I get into control over my fatigue level so I'm still doing the activities that are most important to me? And then in that session, when someone does come to us, we might also ask, can we actually look at how you move? How does your body respond to certain movements and activities when you're in the motion? Like, what does your heart rate do? What does your breathing do? What does your, in terms of if you feel anxious around doing movements, we will look at that as a whole entirety together, because we know that it's physical, cognitive and emotional elements that contribute to fatigue. So that's what will happen when we do our combined assessments.
And the other thing I would probably add is the bit around supporting somebody to make a change. So all of the clinicians we work with have a lot of sort of experience and background in different ways to support that, because actually with any of the rehab we do, the expectation is that you've got to do something new and you've got to do something differently. And that's actually really, really hard. And I know I always go on about this, so if you've heard me speak before, I'm really sorry to use this analogy again. But think about, a New Year's resolution that you perhaps haven't done on the 1st of January. And then you can't start it the next day, because we can't start anything apart from on a Monday, can we? So then you're sort of backing on. Before you know, we're through January and you just wait till next year until you try again. That's a population that maybe don't have a condition, aren't symptomatic, aren't going through uncertainty, don't have the worry, everything else that's packaged up. So where we come in, or we hope we come in, is that we make change and doing something different and trying out different strategies, giving things a go, feel manageable, even when it's really, really hard. And that's where we're so passionate about people having the right tailored support, because we know actually it's really hard. A leaflet often doesn't cut it, because putting that information into practice is such a big ask. And so we try and tailor things really gently.
Change is difficult.
Change is hard.
It's hard for everyone. And then when you've got combined on other things that you're doing, you've got things that are going on at home, you've got appointments to attend, you've got your treatment going on. They're all things that are compounding in. So change is hard, and that's hopefully where we can help bite-size things down so they become achievable.
Okay. Before we move on to talk about some of the things that people can do you find, kind of with the MPN patients that you've been seeing, does their fatigue ever differ from some of the other patients with other conditions that you see?
Want to go?
Yeah, I think what we tend to find actually is that we have to remember that fatigue is so unique to the individual, but we do find there sort of two groups. So people in the room here might say, actually, that does sound like me, but we find two complete extremes almost. So we have, on one hand, what we call is classed as sort of low burners, but that is you feel exhausted almost all the time. It doesn't matter what the activity is, you feel exhausted, and when you rest, you don't necessarily feel that you're feeling better after it. And then we find what we call like the high burners. They're doing lots and lots and lots of activities, and that could include going to the gym, running, doing the children runs, packing their day in, and then all of a sudden they bust. So we call that like the boom and bust cycle. So then it's like, and now I need to just rest and do nothing. So we kind of find that happens probably more we see in our MPN groups out of all of the other cancers that we treat. And so that's why when it comes to how we manage it, the first bit is really finding out, okay, what the triggers and the eases are, how does that fatigue impact on that person, but how we manage it really now becomes tailored to the individual. So I don't know if you,
Yeah, I think that's, and again, it's why it's so important. What really matters is how you feel about it, because we can look on paper on somebody's diary and it looks actually like you're filling your week, and I work with a lot of people that do a lot more than I do, But if that's not what you want to be able to do and you're not feeling satisfied, you've probably cut out things that you enjoy and are most meaningful and most sort of your self-well-being side of things, because they're the things that quickly drop off. You can look at a week and feel very flat, feel very fatigued. You're just powering through, you're burning through, you're crashing, you're busting. And so it's not working. You know, you're kind of how you're feeling and the impact fatigue is having is massive. But on paper, it looks like no problem at all. And I think that's where the pattern is so important, and your opinion on what that week is looking and feeling like is so important.
So how can we then, for some patients, unpick this, and what kind of suggestions might there be that patients can, you know, that you look at with patients, and what are some of the interventions that you might suggest for patients to do?
I mean, I think the way we kind of break it up in our heads is understanding the different systems. So we've got the drive system that's being motivated, it's being active, it's doing lots, it's really needed. But, you know, as a society, we're so productive focused at the moment, but we need to be productive, we need to have drive. And I know you'll come in a minute and talk a lot about physical activity as well, and that very much fits in that camp. So we need that system, but the problem is if you're in that system all the time, that's exhausting. It's very energy depleting, it's very dopamine heavy, there's a lot going on. And this is where it comes into the balance. So on the other side of that, we've got the soothing system. And if we start to think about almost fatigue being like a bank account, so you start with so much energy or money in the morning, great metaphor for just financial advice, by the way, which you all listen to. You know, one option is you just keep spending. You spend, you're overdrawn by lunchtime, so you just crash out until your pay comes back in. Or you can spend a little and then put something back in. And that's what's in your soothing system. What for you is soothing and restorative? Spend a little, put something back in. And if you try with that kind of metaphor, the idea is that maybe you're not overdrawn by lunchtime. Maybe you can do everything you need to do through your day, but you're stretching it out in a different way, you're planning it in a different way. And so it's such an important branch, is that balance between making sure you understand what is soothing for you. And when we talk about soothing, yes, it's things like rest, but rest comes in lots of different forms. It's not always being inactive. It's making sure rest is intentional, that it's good quality rest, because actually doom scrolling for 4 hours is not good quality rest in the slightest. Neither is really passive TV. You know, there's lots of sort of things we do that we sort of feel have been inactive, so therefore that's ticked off, that's done, but actually it's not quality rest. So a lot of it for us is making sure we're being intentional about what we're doing and through this balance. There's also sort of the fret system that's a bit different, but I think for the just understanding that yin and yang of managing fatigue is that, and I'm sure you'll come in about how you get up and moving.
Before you do, so when you talk about rest, and quite often what may come up in consults and things is about napping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of, and sometimes napping's good.
Yeah, I don't mind a nap. Got 2 young children, I love a nap.
But equally, what else would you say about that nap?
So, I mean, the first thing about naps, I would say, because there is a lot, people come and it's always said with a bit of a guilty sort of smirk, but if a nap fits into your daily life, you wake up from it and you're not groggy for, you know, extended amount of time. None of us, well, a few people, but on the whole, we don't bounce out of bed. But as long as it's lifting quite quickly, you haven't napped to a level that you've got those really sedatives chemicals going on in your body. You feel better after. It's not too late in the day so that you're not disrupting your sleep. You know, then have a nap. Brilliant. But if that's not working for you, and obviously if you're having to go to work or you've got care responsibilities or it's getting too long, it's too late, then look at other things. So yes, there's lots of mindfulness/relaxation type things, but there's lots of sort of restful activity you can do. So you might find that for you it's switching off from something sort of heavily active, but actually a flow state, you know, something that is a mindful colouring, it could be arts and crafts, those kind of things that are calming that you can do, can be mindful movement. If actually what's driving your fatigue is sort of an emotional driver, or your kind of, we call it cognitive, but it's your thinking processes, then maybe actually it is a gentle walk, or it's sort of mindful movement. So there's so many different, you know, types. We're just about to start a mindful gardening group, because actually people want to do gardening type crafts and thinking about how to bring that into what they do. If you're not somebody that finds a guided relaxation easy, then try different ideas out. but also make sure you're trying ideas out for lots of different settings. So you need something soothing that you can do in a waiting area, at work, at a train station, and you need something you can do when you're at home in the perfect environment, because life is full of lots of different environments. So trying them out, trying lots of different ways out. And we've got our program that goes through some of them, our online program, but there's so many different resources out there. So if you feel like, oh, it's not for me, try something else, because there's so many different options, is what I would say.
Yeah. So obviously the other big side to that is exercise. Yeah. And for me, I probably ditched the exercise part and just say physical activity.
Yeah.
What is it that you would then talk to patients about around this physical activity and what they could perhaps do in terms of this to try and help manage fatigue?
Yeah. So, and I think people get quite scared with the term, I think, can be exercise, because actually when we talk about exercise, people assume that means that we need to go to the gym and we need to be in lycra, and that isn't the case. We don't need to be that. It's got to be, it's activity. So the general push, particularly with fatigue, because actually right now, in terms of the evidence base, the evidence is really strong. Actually, the more active we are, actually it does have really great outcomes on our fatigue levels and how we feel from a fatigue perspective. But what I would key say to this is about how we pace ourselves with our physical activity. So it's pace, don't push yourself in doing stuff that actually it brings you into feeling more fatigue, and that your body feels then exhausted, because that's not the aims of the physical activity. So what we will do is we'll spend some time with the patient individually and really make sure that actually we're tailoring the physical activity, something they enjoy, because that's really important. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it. It's like when Rose just gave the scenario about New Year's resolutions, and that if we don't do it on Monday, we push it back to another year. If you don't enjoy the activity, we probably won't embed it into our daily weeks. So it's got to be, first thing is to enjoy it, and then we really work on with it how we pace it, like build it into your plan, and how you slowly build up to ideally the recommendations. But if we can go to the next slide, I don't want to scare people in the room almost to go, because if I was to ask, in terms of, you see the recommendations here, these are physical activity recommendations for everybody, okay? And in terms of if you have a cancer and MPN as a condition, it doesn't change. We all are governed by the same sort of physical activity recommendations, and actually that's agreed internationally. So if we go to the Australian recommendations for their cancer group, it's the same. If we go to the American Sports Medical Council, it's the same as the UK and the European. And that's 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week is what the aim is at aerobic exercise. So aerobic is things that challenges our heart and our lungs. So that could be a brisk walk. It might also just be a leisurely walk for someone, because that might be moderate activity for them, okay? It could be a run, it could be a jog, it could be swimming, it could be cycling. So there's many different types of activities that could be for aerobic. On top of that aerobic, okay, is that we should be doing 2 times a week resistance work. So that's things that strengthens our muscles and also keeps our bones nice and healthy and strong. So we should be doing that on top of what we say 150 minutes per week. And I should have said that 150 minutes is not you do it in one chunk. If I was to ask the room here, do we do that? The majority of us don't. Even if I was to ask the panel, are we achieving 150? We probably are not going to say that we will do that. So I think that the thing is, it's the direction that we're aiming for, rather than going, you have to do this right now, okay? And then what I say is, if we break that, what that 150 means, it probably means around 30 minutes per day. 30 minutes 5 times a week, is what it means. That would break the 150 minutes up. And then on top of that, for us, when we're a bit older, we need to also incorporate some balance exercises into it, because we know as we get older, that system in terms of our balance, and we lose a flexibility. So we do have to incorporate some exercises that should include those. So that's the direction that we're aiming for. But for most, and I'm going to give an example of one of our, a patient that I worked really close with. She bought at Christmas time a treadmill. That's what was at home. And her expectation was that she needed to do 20 minutes or more on that treadmill for it to feel like she had done something. And so she didn't go on it, she didn't use it. But that's the activity she wanted to do. So I spent with her time in coaching and going, okay, let's lower the expectation. Why do you need to do 20 minutes initially? Why can't it be 5 minutes? 5 minutes is okay. Your body can't do 20 minutes right now. Let's do 5 minutes. And we built up to 5 minutes 2 times a week, then 3 times a week. When she got to 3 times a week, we went to 10 minutes. We then did 15 minutes. And then she got to her 20 minutes over time. So the first thing is that expectations we've got to lower if you're not there. And let's gradually build it in so that you can achieve something that you feel it meets your expectations. And the key thing around why I think right now the aim is for the physical activity recommendations, or exercise and physical activity is high on one of the key interventions, is because we know when our body shuts down and it doesn't do activity, it gets deconditioned, it gets weak, and that feeds into that vicious cycle of fatigue. So somewhere we've got to try and stop it and try and build that body up so that actually it is physically strong. And that's the important thing. But the reason why we put the balance bit in that picture is because it is a balancing act. We've got to do what Rose has just said in terms of the replenishing and the making sure we rest alongside the activity building alongside it.
And you briefly touched on some of the other things that you offer as a service, so kind of maybe around sleep, maybe around coaching, around change. Is there anything else that you think might help the audience in what other things that they could access through services like this?
I think it's looking at what locally, because we are aware that it's very different locally. What you have, obviously, looking at things like your nutritional services, thinking about any complementary therapy that you have, psychological therapies. I'd also probably bring in if there's any vocational rehab sort of services, because they often do a lot of support around fatigue. So we do a lot of work with people around supporting at work. So what kind of reasonable adjustments you might be able to make at work, and we support letters to advise employers on how we should be making sure that a reasonable adjustment is actually more than just a graded return at one point. It tends to be, grading up over 4 weeks, and that's all that is ever suggested. There's lots of different ways we can suggest how workplaces and your daily work could be easier, and you'd be more successful at work if you can have those slight adjustments. So definitely it's looking at where, do you have a specialist fatigue service? If not, how can you kind of pull in the different options that you have around you and think about where it's impacting the most, and do you have something that's more targeted at that? There's obviously also loads of sort of physical activity, support in the community in gyms and, swimming centres, things that people can access.
Yeah, there is quite a lot out there. I mean, those that obviously come through the clinics with Euclid, we've got options. We run like 10-week rehab programs in our physical activity rehab gym. They also come to our joint clinic so that we can tailor it to the individual. But some of those services do exist out in the communities too. And what I would say is Cancer Care Map. I don't know if you guys are aware of the Cancer Care Map, but that's a really good sort of resource area where you can go in and you can tap in and you can say, you can even put your MPN in, because there might be some local groups on it that registered on that, or you just put cancer and fatigue, or you want to do cancer and exercise, or you can have another symptom that you pop into it, and all of the resources that they've got logged on that central database will come up with the options that are local in your area. So that's a good resource, I think, to use. I don't know if you use it in your clinics, Cancer Care Map, at all.
I don't think we do, actually. And I suppose, and sadly, because those that know me will know that I can actually carry on talking about fatigue all day, but we are coming to the end of our session. So my top tips would be discuss with your clinicians, have that conversation with whoever you're seeing in your clinic, explain to them how fatigue is impacting on you. What would your top tips be?
I think mine would be about looking for where that balance is and being really honest about if you allow yourself to have sort of intentional rest points through the day and balancing that out. I won't touch on physical stuff because I think you will. I haven't spoken much about sleep, and that's all something I'm a bit aware of because there's so much that we can look at in trying to balance fatigue and sleep and how they impact. I think just bringing in sleep a little bit quickly, it's just remembering that there's a lot of advice out there how to have the perfect night's sleep, but actually if your condition has symptoms that makes the perfect night's sleep unattainable. So if you have a symptom that you have to wake up for, going to the toilet, sweating, things like that, look at how you can make it as easy as possible to get back to sleep. So think really realistically. So if you're getting up to go to the toilet, keep the lights really low. Think about how the environment makes that as easy as possible. If you're struggling because of thoughts and feelings, how are you going to practice something in the day so your brain is hardwired to use an anxiety management strategy overnight? If it's sweating, how do you have bedding next to your bed that you can just lay over so you can quickly go back to sleep? So think practically. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you sort of think, well, that's the reality, how are we going to make it as easy as possible? I think that makes a big change. And if sleep's then a problem, if you can improve that, it does have a massive knock-on effect to your fatigue.
And I'm going to obviously encourage movement, but I'm going to say to you that anything is better than nothing. So it is about pace, don't push. And I know that I from a resource point of view, I just plugged like Cancer Care Map, but I forgot to plug our own resource into this, which is that we have designed a fatigue resource module that you could go to, and all of the sort of things that we have spoken about today will be on that, but also it also has interventions and top tips from complementary therapy, from our dietitian team and our nursing team on that as well. And so it's a resource to go to, and it's a starting point. And what I would say is please do start, like if it's impacting on you, please do start to go, okay, let me explore how I can get help for this, and do ask for help. There's more than one top tip, apologies.
So it's all that's left for us to say thank you. Thank you for coming today and discussing this. We'll be around for the question.